Alright everybody, welcome to topic number 3, which is learning. Now, this doesn't mean learning facts, like I'm currently giving you information and you are remembering it and absorbing it. When we talk about learning in a psychological sense, we're talking about learning new behavior. How do we know how to act in a particular way, or how to respond, or how to think, or how to feel? How do we learn that we enjoy going to the beach, or that hot water is going to burn us? And yet sometimes we're told, but we learn far more by experience. So that's what we're talking about here. Now, we're going to go back to the 4 levels of explanation to start off with, because as we know, this course is organized around those 4 levels of explanation. The idea that everything human beings do can be categorized and explained by one of these levels. They're not mutually exclusive, but the idea is that everything we do can be explained by one of the levels. And those levels, of course, are biological, basic processes, the person level, and the socio-cultural level. And learning very much is a basic process. Basic processes are these things that seem to be universal across all human beings, no matter their culture or their place in time. These are processes that we all engage with, and the way that we learn seems to be pretty universal in that regard. So social cognition, of course, fit into the sociocultural category. When we talk about personality, that's going to be the person level. When we talk about altered states, that's the biological level. And healthy minds is going to incorporate all of them. So we're in the basic processes level now. There is, of course, as I said, they're not mutually exclusive. There is a biological component to learning as well. Now, this is not information that you need to know, but in case any of you are interested, it does also provide some foundational ideas and material for why we learn the way that we do. So I'm going to talk just for a little bit about the neurobiology of learning. So what is actually going on in our brain when we're learning a new behavior or a new thought or a new feeling? So most of our knowledge about this comes from the study of other creatures that have similar brains and bigger neurons than ours, and we've made assumptions about what our brain is doing. So learning seems to be associated with changes at the synapses that link our neurons together. So when we experience something repeatedly, presynaptic neurons release neurotransmitters more freely. So basically, the more that we do something, the easier it gets, because those pathways in our brain are more solid and more forged. Our brain knows the way to go already. It's the idea behind the more you practice something, the better you get at it. Postsynaptic neurons also become more sensitive and more readily stimulated. So basically, the more learning experiences we have, the longer these changes will last. So the more we do something, the more we'll be able to do it, and for longer. Neurons may actually eventually grow new synaptic connections between them to strengthen those links. So if we do something often enough, our brain will actually grow a new pathway to say, hey, this person is doing this a lot, we need to be able to get there as quick as possible. And forgetting is the process whereby learned information becomes no longer accessible. So those pathways become crowded or unable to travel as fast as they usually can. Some evidence suggests that these connections kind of get pruned as we forget how to do something. So there's a video here on the neurobiology of learning, and this goes into that in a little bit more detail if you are interested. I've put a link in the description, and it's also available on this PowerPoint. So some things that we do as human beings are what we call just innate responses. They're things we don't ever really need to learn. They just seem to be what we instinctually do. Some behavior just appears to be with us from birth. So crying when we're sad or frustrated, things like that. And these will usually persist unless we make a conscious, deliberate effort to change them. These are the things that we just do. We haven't learnt them, we haven't observed them, we just do them. Innate responses seem fairly instinctual. So for example, in dogs, they salivate when food is given to them. They haven't learned how to do that. It's just something that they do when food is presented. And this is often referred to as an unconditional response. So there hasn't been anything in place to make us respond in this way. It's just what we automatically do. So this is something that is done from birth that doesn't have to be taught in any way. Something that also comes into play when we talk about learning is learning preparedness. So how willing and able we are to learn the new behaviour and thought. So people and animals appear to be biologically wired to more readily learn particular types of associations. So for example, say you're in a restaurant and they're playing a really familiar particular piece of music, and then you eat a bowl of soup and you get really, really sick afterwards. You're going to associate that feeling of sickness or nausea with the thing you ate, not with the song. Obviously, we're going to associate taste and nausea more readily than sound and nausea. We're also more inclined to develop phobias about things like snakes and spiders rather than cars, even though they are statistically more likely to cause harm. We're just more readily able to associate a snake or a spider with harm than with cars. Now, learning behaviour can be seen across the animal kingdom. Even worms and snails learn to avoid things that are painful or disagreeable. And the more complex the creature becomes, the more complex their learning is. But we can begin to understand these complex processes that, say, human beings go through by understanding the basic principles of learning. And that's what we're going to be going through, these basic ideas that we can recognise in some simple animals all the way up to what we experience as humans. Now, a lot of what we're going to be going through comes from information we found out through the 20th century. Understanding the human mind started developing rapidly. So while the greatest minds have always been interested in behaviour, thoughts and feelings of human beings, it's only been in the relatively recent past that this study was formalised in the field of psychology. And so our next two topics, learning and personality, will trace the history of that understanding of why we do what we do. And we begin with this idea of behaviourism. So this was a concept that was developed in the late 19th century around this idea that all human activity, absolutely everything we did, is a response to conditioning. That basically everything we do is because we have associated a stimulus with a behaviour. So we're going to start with some of these ideas of behaviourism. All in all, there's going to be three basic learning processes that we're going to go through. The first is what's called classical conditioning, commonly known as learning by association. The second one is operant conditioning. This is learning by reinforcement and punishment. And finally, observational learning, learning by watching and modelling ourselves on other people.